Shadow the Hedgehog is a really disappointing game.
Damn you! No! It's not true!
Despite its title character being arguably one of the most interesting characters in the Sonic franchise, the game suffered from a hit-or-miss story, sloppy direction, and, sadly, a very flanderized version of Shadow, which played him up as an unnecessarily overly angsty character and removed all the heart and soul of him, which sadly we still feel the ramifications of this flanderization today. However, with a little luck, maybe his character will go back on track after his appearance in the third Sonic movie, kinda like what happened with Knuckles. Regardless, I've stated multiple times that I think the game Shadow the Hedgehog had some real potential, and admittedly, I do think it is a fun game to play, even if objectively it's of low quality. So, naturally, I wanted to rewrite the story. But then I came across a problem. I've already adapted the events of Shadow the Hedgehog in multiple of my Sonic AUs, and I can pretty much guarantee this won't be the last time I adapt this story. So, what can I do for this rewrite to make things a bit more interesting? I needed a curveball, something unexpected. And as if it was an answer to my prayers, a commenter by the name I Have Public Domain Characters proposed the idea of designing a Black Arms Cosmo to me. And although I initially wrote it off, after giving it a bit of thought, I thought that would actually be a really cool idea. So with his permission, I decided to adapt that into my rewrite. Now, for those of you unfamiliar, Cosmo was an original character created for Sonic X. She was the offspring of an alien overlord, and she arrived to assist the heroes. Now, I don't think it takes too much imagination to see how this could be reworked into Shadow the Hedgehog, just by swapping around the alien species. And this would create an interesting dynamic between her and Shadow, especially considering in Sonic X, their only real interaction was, Shadow trying to kill her. Yeah, I think we're going to be changing it up a bit. Also, I want to establish something real quick. The original game had a big emphasis on letting you decide what role Shadow plays in the game. Will he be a hero, anti-hero, villain, something in between? It was really up to you, and I like that. Part of the reason this game is a guilty pleasure for me is that each time I play through the game, I try to do a different route. Since there's well over 200 ways you can play the game, each playthrough can, in theory, be different, even if you have to go to the same final level. So getting the 10 necessary endings to unlock the final story wasn't that hard for me. But I also don't want to have to rewrite this for every possible outcome. So for my version of Shadow the Hedgehog, there's only one route. Besides, as much as I like it, I don't know if the choice system was the best decision, considering this game is meant to allow you to discover the truth of Shadow the Hedgehog. Having all of these alternate routes in a game that is meant to explain the lore of Shadow just makes things confusing. So for the purposes of this video, there is only one route in Shadow the Hedgehog, but I will try to take elements from different routes to give you the best of both worlds. So, with all the foundations set, let's see how the events of Shadow 05 could have played out differently. Our story begins with Shadow reminiscing just outside the borders of Westopolis. It's made clear that a few weeks have passed since the events of Sonic Heroes, and Shadow, still grappling with his amnesia, is beginning to suffer flashes. Bits of his memory keep trying to bubble back to the surface, but he still can't get the full picture. He remembers running through hallways with a girl he can't recognize. Following them is a group of heavily armed soldiers. As a pair of shutter doors lock the intruders away from the pair, one of the soldiers raises his gun, and then...
Maria!
Shadow shudders to himself. He's been trying to suppress these memories. He wants to focus on the here and now, but every time this happens, he can't help but wonder, what do they all mean? Who is this Maria? And who was he before he woke up in the doctor's lab? Shadow tries to snap out of it, reassuring himself of his own identity. No matter who I once was, I am Shadow the... Shadow pauses as he looks to the sky. Blood-red clouds begin to engulf the skyline surrounding Westopolis. Flashing lightning and booming thunder erupt from the epicenter of the storm. And as the unnatural weather reaches its climax, millions of dark monsters emerge from the epicenter. As they reach the ground of the unsuspecting city, they begin wreaking havoc in the streets. Explosions, cries of terror, and screams erupt from the city. Seeing the carnage, Shadow prepares to run in and help in any way he can, when suddenly he hears a twig snap behind him. Shadow quickly turns around to investigate, and what he sees confuses him. A young girl stands a mere 2 yards away from the ultimate life form. Though she looks notably different, she shares many of the same visual traits as these monsters. Shadow approached with caution. "Who are you?" The girl looked up at Shadow, somewhat timid. "My name is Cosmo, and I'm here to pass on the message of my father." "Your father?" Cosmo nodded as a third eye opened on her forehead. Shadow seemed slightly alarmed by this. The eye began to glow red as a projection emerged from it. From the scarlet light emerged a monstrous creature with no lower half. Donned in a brown cloak and golden gems, the creature, with its third eye, looked down at Shadow.
As you can see, the day of reckoning will soon be here. Find the 7 Chaos Emeralds and bring them to me, as promised.
"What are you talking about? And how do you know my name?" Before Shadow could get his answers, a series of explosions erupted in front of him, with Cosmo disappearing in the carnage. What was that about? Who are these guys? How do they know me? And what are they planning? Well, guess I won't get any answers standing here. Better get moving. With that, Shadow skates into Westopolis to put an end to the chaos, and hopefully get some answers. Shadow blazes through Westopolis, taking out a number of monsters as he races by. Like in the original game, you discover 2 Chaos Emeralds in Westopolis. While in the war-torn city, you would come across Sonic the Hedgehog, who is also fighting these dark creatures. Hey Shadow, long time no see. Man, these guys are crazy. They've already caused so much destruction. Yeah, but we've handled worse, right Shadow? Shadow suddenly pauses, a flash suddenly entering his head. The 2 hedgehogs, floating in tandem in space, stopping an unseen enemy, before Shadow falls down to the earth below. Shadow, you feeling okay? Shadow snaps out of his trance. We should split up. We'll cover more ground that way. You head east, I'll head west. Fine, let's make it a friendly competition then. Sonic quickly races off. Shadow smirks a little bit, a clear sign of respect towards the hedgehog's strange optimism. As Shadow raced around the city, he came across Cosmo once more. Greetings, Shadow. I've been looking for you. My father wishes to know how your mission is going. I don't want any part in whatever game your father's playing. But why ever not? Black Doom is the messiah of the Black Arms. He's here to help the planet. Shadow cocked an eyebrow. Does it look like he's helping? Shadow gestured to the city in crisis. Cosmo paused. I'm sure this is all necessary. The ritual prosperity will bring peace to the planet. Shadow sighed, clearly annoyed by this conversation. Look, I don't have time for this. Just stay out of my way. With that, Shadow suddenly revealed one of the Chaos Emeralds. Chaos Control! And with that, he warped away from Cosmo. From a nearby rooftop, a gun lieutenant, who had seen everything, reported his findings to his commanding officer. Commander Tower, This is Lieutenant Rogers. I've spotted Shadow the Hedgehog conversing with the invaders. How should I proceed? Miles away in a GUN command center, Abraham Tower receives the message. A small smirk appeared on his face for a mere moment before turning back to a grimace. His eyes opened sternfully, one of them gold, the other one blue. If you find Shadow with these aliens, kill 'em all. Right, understood, sir. As the transmission ends, Commander Tower begins to mutter to himself. Shadow, this time, you're mine. The scene ends abruptly. It's unclear whether or not the commander is talking about Shadow's previous encounters with GUN, or if they may have some history. Elsewhere, Shadow begins racing through the streets of Lethal Highway. The Black Hedgehog noticed a number of soldiers being overrun by these invaders. So Shadow leaped into the fray, taking out the invaders with a series of melee attacks. To Shadow's surprise, when he looked back at the soldier, their guns were now trained at him? They began opening fire, with Shadow having to dodge their attacks. Once getting out of sight and having a moment to catch his breath, Shadow began to question just why the gun agents turned their weapons against him. And more jarringly, why does it feel familiar? Shadow could picture himself, feel himself, once upon a time, in a similar position, gun agents training their weapons against him, in the city. High above the streets, on a red bridge, Shadow stands alone. Maria, for the people of this planet, I promise you. Now what do we have here? Shadow snapped out of his trance. Sneaking up behind him was Rouge the Bat. You must have really gotten the commander's nerve. I mean, an alien invasion and he's focusing his forces against you? You must have really pissed them off. It's a good thing for you that I don't normally follow these kind of orders. Otherwise, I'd have to arrest you. I can worry about Gun later. Right now I need to stop the invasion. Well, clearly. Where should we start? At that moment, an explosion broke out next to the two heroes. A small, militarized UFO was bombing the streets of Westopolis. Well, I guess that's as good a place as any. Come on, handsome, let's do it to it. The partners quickly leapt into action to put an end to the extraterrestrial war machine. Shadow attempted to use a direct homing attack onto the flying saucer. However, his attack did little to nothing. So instead, he jumped onto the ship and tried attacking it directly. In response, the vehicle began to gyrate suddenly, knocking Shadow off its wing. Shadow began to fall towards one of the many gaps in the road, but Rouge quickly swooped in, catching him at the last moment. Thanks for the catch. Just mind your step next time. She flew Shadow back to the ground before flying back up into the air. The bat began to soar around the UFO like a gnat. You know, I don't like it when people mess with my friends. They're hard to come by in my line of business. The UFO tried blasting at her, but Rouge simply retaliated with a series of explosives, doing minimum but noticeable damage. That gave Shadow an idea. Rouge, keep the thing distracted. I'll be right back. Okay, just hurry back. As tough as I am, this guy seems to be a little out of my weight class. Shadow skated off to find what he needed. Shadow found a discarded gun motorcycle and a pistol. Not really my style, but it'll have to do. Meanwhile, Rouge was dealing with the brunt force of the UFO. She was doing a fair bit of damage, but she was only dodging killing shots by the edge of her teeth. Just then, Rouge heard the roar of a motorcycle coming towards her. Rouge, throw me a bomb! Rouge was initially confused, but then quickly figured out what Shadow had planned. Oh, you cheeky devil. Rouge threw the bomb Shadow's way. He caught the bomb, strapping it nearby the gas tank. Shadow drifted towards the UFO, even ramping off of some of the street's debris to get as close as possible. Mid-air, Shadow jumped off the bike, aimed his gun, and then... the bomb, bike, and UFO all went up in smoke simultaneously. Rouge smirked. So, destruction of government vehicles and unlawful use of explosives? Quite daring. Especially in front of a gun agent. We should get moving. There could be more drones like this. Come on, don't pretend like this isn't at least a little fun. Shadow paused. He chuckled lightly, putting his hand on his face. Fine, I enjoyed the motorcycle. A little. Okay, let's get... Rouge paused. Who's the kid? Shadow looked over to who Rouge was referring to. It was Cosmo. Why must you resist, Shadow? We're here to help this planet. Shadow's gaze intensified. This is your last chance, Cosmo. Get out of my way. Cosmo suddenly warped forward, grabbing Shadow's right hand. Shadow was surprised, but then noticed that she possessed the yellow Chaos Emerald. I truly wish it wouldn't have come to this. But if this is what it takes for you to see things our way, then so be it. Shadow began to reach for the blue Chaos Emerald to counter whatever strategy she had in mind. Her third eye began to glow red once more. My father was able to make me see the glory of the Black Arms. I'm sure I can do the same to you. As she prepared her psychic attack, Shadow prepared an attack with his chaos powers. So simultaneously, the two enunciated the words, Chaos Control! As the psychic and chaos energies collided by the two opposing forces, an exception was made. To both Shadow and Cosmo, the world began to fade into a red light. The pair were equally confused. What is this place? I don't know. This wasn't meant to happen. Cosmo's voice seemed strained, as if this was the first time in a long time she had truly spoken up. Just then, the world began to change around them once more. Standing mere meters away from Cosmo and Shadow was Shadow and Maria? Shadow's eyes widened, as if he was finally seeing the image clearly. This was our last conversation before the end. Cosmo looked confused at Shadow. What do you mean, the end? Shadow wasn't expecting Cosmo to be legitimately curious, but he answered anyway. I don't understand everything, but I believe I was created here. And Maria, she was my only friend. Some human soldiers arrived, and they did unspeakable things. But even after all that, she didn't have any hatred in her eyes for them. Shadow began to tear up slightly. Cosmo began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Once more, the world began to change, but this time, it wasn't Shadow's memory. It was Cosmo's. One of the Black Armed soldiers began ripping off a fleshy exterior to a birthing pod. From within, Cosmo began looking out into the world for the first time. Looking down at her was Black Doom. In a graspy, alien tone, he stated,
Cosmo, my dear, Princess of the Black Arms, embodiment of chaos, you are mine and mine alone, the perfect slave. You answer only to me, and you will be grateful.
The world changed once more. As Cosmo collapsed to her knees, the world around them turned black as soot. Cosmo began crying uncontrollably on the ground. He did this to me. Everything. He created me to serve him, to do unthinkable things to others. He stole my free will. He stole all of our free wills. And he made us love him for it. I hate him. I hate him. I hate him. Once more, Cosmo collapsed to the ground, silent as a stone, with tears still streaming down her cheek. Shadow knew he had to do something. He got down on one knee, trying to comfort Cosmo. You're free from him in here. Yes, but as soon as I leave, I'll be under his control again. I don't want to. I don't want to let him decide. You get to decide. Only you can decide your destiny, Cosmo. Not me, not Black Doom, not anyone else. Only you. Shadow reached out to Cosmo, extending a hand to help her up. Not as a sign of truce, not as a sign of alliance, but simply as a kind gesture to a kid who truly needed help. Cosmo looked up at Shadow, and after a momentary hesitation, slowly reached out, accepting the hand. Back in reality, the pair got back up onto their feet. Only a few moments had passed since they'd entered, but to them, it had felt like a lifetime. Rouge looked confused at the duo. What happened to you two? You two just stood there. It's a long story. Are you okay, Cosmo? Yeah, I think for the first time, I'm truly okay. What do you want to do now? Well, let's find those Chaos Emeralds. And with that, Cosmo, Shadow, and Rouge set off to save the world.